One man stood against an empire. The year was 331 BC. On a vast, sun-baked plain near a village called Gaugamela, the destiny of the known world hung in the balance. This was not just another battle, it was the final, decisive showdown. On one side stood Alexander, the young, audacious king of Macedon, leading an army that had marched thousands of miles from home. On the other was Darius III, the great king of Persia, who had gathered the full might of his sprawling empire to crush this upstart invader once and for all. The air was thick with dust and anticipation. Everything that had been and everything that was to come would be decided by what happened next. The stakes could not have been higher. This was a clash of civilizations, a contest between the disciplined, tight-knit world of the Greek city-states and the immense, multicultural power of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. For centuries, Persia had been the dominant force in the East, a superpower whose wealth and influence were legendary. Alexander's campaign was more than a quest for glory. It was an act of audacious defiance against this established order. The future of Persia, the future of Greece, and the very shape of the next 1,000 years of history would be forged in the fire and blood of this single day. The world watched, holding its breath. Imagine the scene. Under the immense Mesopotamian sky, Alexander looked out from a low ridge. He saw a sea of men stretching to the horizon, a force so large it seemed to blot out the earth itself. His scouts had reported the numbers, and they were staggering. Yet there was no fear in his eyes, only a cold, calculated resolve. Darius, from his opulent command post in the center of his line, felt the weight of his ancestors on his shoulders. He was the defender of a legacy stretching back to Cyrus the Great. He had the numbers, he had the ground, and he had the absolute conviction that this foreign invasion would end here, today. The road to Gaugamela was paved with Alexander's ambition and Darius's desperation. 2 years earlier, Alexander had crossed the Hellespont, leaving his kingdom of Macedon behind to embark on the greatest military gamble in history. His stated goal was to punish Persia for its invasions of Greece a century and a half before, but his true aim was far grander: conquest. He moved with lightning speed, a whirlwind of tactical brilliance that seemed unstoppable. He had already demonstrated his genius in 2 major battles, at the Granicus River and again at Issus, where he had even captured Darius's own family. After the humiliating defeat at Issus, Darius had tried to negotiate. He offered Alexander a fortune in gold, a royal marriage, and half his empire, everything west of the Euphrates River. For any other general, this would have been an unimaginable triumph. Alexander's most trusted general, Parmenion, famously advised him, "I would accept it, were I Alexander." To which Alexander reputedly replied, "So would I, were I Parmenion." He rejected the offer. He secured the eastern Mediterranean coastline, neutralizing the Persian navy port by port, culminating in the brutal siege of Tyre. He then marched into Egypt, where he was welcomed as a liberator and hailed as a pharaoh. All the while, Darius gathered a larger army, drawing troops from the furthest corners of his empire: Scythian horsemen on the steppes, Indian warriors from the subcontinent. He was determined not to be outmaneuvered again. This time, he would choose the battlefield. This collision was, therefore, inevitable. Alexander needed to strike at the heart of the Persian Empire and defeat its king in a decisive, open battle. Darius needed to stop Alexander to save his throne, his life, and his dynasty. He had learned from past mistakes. He would not be caught in narrow terrain as at Issus. He would fight where scythed chariots and numbers could dominate. The stage was set for a final confrontation to decide the master of Asia. At the heart of this conflict were 2 profoundly different leaders. Alexander of Macedon was just 25 years old, a prodigy tutored by Aristotle. He had been king since he was 20. He was a soldier's general who led from the front, sharing his men's hardships and risking his own life. His charisma was magnetic. His men revered him, not just as a king, but as a comrade whose genius they trusted implicitly. He commanded around 47,000 veterans. They were disciplined, loyal, and masters of their craft. Darius III was a traditional monarch, capable and brave, but not a field commander like Alexander. He commanded from the center, surrounded by his elite guard. His army was vast, perhaps 100,000, even up to 250,000. Persians, Medes, Babylonians, Scythians, Bactrians, and Indian warriors with war elephants. Its strength was its size. Alexander's army was a finely tuned instrument, the phalanx with 18-foot sarissas, an unbreakable wall from the front, and his trump card, the elite companion cavalry on the right, Thessalians securing the left, an infantry anvil with a cavalry hammer. As the sun climbed higher on the morning of October 1st, 331 BC, the two armies began to advance. The sheer scale of the Persian line was awe-inspiring, a wall of men and horses that seemed to stretch on forever. Alexander, however, did not advance straight ahead. Instead, he initiated one of the most famous and daring maneuvers in military history. He began to move his entire army not forward, but diagonally to the right. This oblique advance baffled the Persians. Alexander seemed to be marching off the edge of the prepared battlefield, away from the center where Darius and his elite troops stood. If Darius did nothing, his left would be outflanked, and Alexander was moving away from the smooth lanes prepared for the chariots. Forced to react, Darius sent his left-wing cavalry under the satrap Bessus to intercept Alexander's sideways advance. This was exactly what Alexander wanted. By pulling the Persian left outward, he began to stretch their line, creating tension. He had anticipated this and deployed light troops and mercenaries in a staggered echelon behind the line. They clashed with the oncoming Persians. The flank battle swelled and drew in more Persian units. The focus of the fight shifted away from the center, just as Alexander had planned. His flank was bait. Meanwhile, Darius, seeing the escalating flank battle, unleashed his trump card, the scythed chariots, straight at the phalanx. But Alexander was ready. He had trained his infantry for this moment. On command, the front ranks opened lanes for the chariots to pass through. Soldiers along the lanes hurled javelins at horses and drivers. The rear ranks closed the gaps, trapping the chariots. The terror weapon was neutralized with discipline. The battle on the right flank became a vortex, pulling in Persian cavalry. A gap began to appear between Bessus's wing and Darius's center, the moment he had engineered the fulcrum of the battle. With cobra-like decisiveness, he wheeled the companion cavalry he had kept in reserve, forming a giant wedge with himself at the tip. He abandoned the flank and drove for the gap, lances lowered, aimed like a spearhead at King Darius III. The pivotal moment. The companions, the finest horsemen of the ancient world, galloped across the dusty plain. The ground thundered. The charge was unstoppable. They smashed into the weakened Persian line, shattering the royal guard and the Greek mercenaries near the king. The wedge punched through, perfectly. Panic rippled through the Persian center. These were the king's best troops, his immortals and royal kinsmen, yet they were unready for such concentrated ferocity, led by a king who fought like a demon. Alexander and his companions carved a bloody path toward Darius's ornate war chariot. For Darius, it became personal. Alexander was now close, helmet gleaming, sword flashing, while the protective cordon collapsed. The battle reached its crisis. Staring into the face of Alexander's ferocious charge, Darius III made a fateful decision. The Macedonian wedge had broken through his guard, and the enemy king was almost upon him. With his safety in jeopardy, Darius panicked. He wheeled his chariot and fled the battlefield at full speed, choosing life over crown. It was a single act of fear with catastrophic consequences. The linchpin was pulled. Soldiers saw the royal standard retreat. The news spread like wildfire. The king is gone. The king has fled. The psychological impact was devastating. The Persian center's resolve evaporated. A disciplined line dissolved into a terrified mob, weapons thrown down in desperate flight. Though some flanks still fought hard, Mazaeus even broke into the Macedonian camp. News of Darius's flight shattered morale. Attacks faltered. Riders joined the general rout. Alexander did not immediately pursue. Showing discipline, he wheeled to support Parmenion, crushed the last resistance, and only then began the pursuit. The battle was over. Gaugamela lay carpeted with the dead, tens of thousands of Persians. Alexander's smaller army had won a total, scarcely believable victory. The greatest empire on earth was broken in a single afternoon. In the aftermath, the Persian Empire ceased to exist as a unified state. Cities opened their gates. Alexander entered Babylon as a liberator and as king. At Susa and Persepolis, he seized the wealth of generations, funding future campaigns and reshaping economies. More than gold, he inherited Darius's title, King of Asia. Satraps and governors swore fealty. He was no longer merely king of Macedon. He was successor to Cyrus the Great. The human cost was immense, devastating on the Persian side. Macedonian losses were remarkably light. Persian casualties numbered in the tens of thousands. Darius fled east to raise another army, but his authority was gone. Betrayed by Bessus, he was arrested and murdered. Found dying in a cart, he received a royal burial from Alexander, who vowed to hunt his assassins, cementing his own legitimacy. The Battle of Gaugamela was a turning point of human history. Its consequences rippled across continents, the fall of Persia and the birth of the Hellenistic Age. With barriers shattered, Greek culture, language, and ideas flooded the East and met Babylonian and Persian mathematics, astronomy, and religions. Innovation followed. Alexander founded dozens of cities, many Alexandrias from Egypt to Afghanistan, centers of trade, learning, and exchange. Greek became the lingua franca. Power shifted to Hellenistic kingdoms. Trade spanned continents, linking the Mediterranean with India.